Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for this event, which marks the launch of the consultation on our draft strategy. My name is Mike Fox. I recently joined the OEP as head of comms, and I'm sure there's people out there that I will be getting to know and working with in the days and weeks and months to come. The aim of today's afternoon event is really to bring you up to speed with where we are with the establishment of the OEP as a new public body, and also because we're actually at a very exciting milestone for the OEP. Just yesterday we got our powers, and the most immediate thing that allows us to do is come out and set out our proposed approach to how we will carry out our role, which is to protect and improve the environment by holding government and public bodies to account. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dame Glenys Stacey, the chair of the OEP, and also then Natalie Prosser, our interim chief exec, who will give you a bit of an update and proper welcome and introduction.
So thank you very much, Mike, and welcome. And thank you all very much for giving us your time this afternoon. So we each appreciate, I think, on this call the fundamental role our environment plays in the health, prosperity and well-being of the nation. And we are aware as well of the pressing threat that our environment faces. And it's in this context that the OEP has been created over the course of the last year or so. And our mission now is to protect and improve our environment, holding the government and public bodies to account. And as you heard from Mike, we're now fully vested. We were given our powers by Parliament just yesterday, and we now want to get on and deliver as Parliament intends, and so make the best possible difference to our environment. Now, we're delighted to begin here our formal consultation on our draft strategy. You should see by the end of this session how we're interpreting and giving life to the role that Parliament has given us. And we've listened carefully to a wide range of views as we've developed our thinking. And we're grateful, really grateful to all those who've spoken with us. But we are keen now to hear from as wide a range, as many people as possible, before we do settle our strategy and our approach. So I'm delighted then to welcome you to this event and to start the ball rolling by introducing our CEO, Natalie Prosser. So it's over to you, Natalie.
Thank you, Dame Glenys, and thank you all for being here with us today as we launch our consultation on our very first strategy and enforcement policy. We're a brand new public body with a critical role to play. I'd like to thank all of our stakeholders in our community, Parliament and government who have championed and enabled the creation of the OEP, and for their ongoing support, time and energy in helping us get up and onto our feet. Many of you are here with us today, and I hope that you continue with us as we move forward into this next exciting phase. Our mission to protect and improve the environment by holding government and other public authorities to account is both important and demanding. We need to get it right. We are now ready to begin our work in earnest. The OEP has a broad toolkit available to us to help us do our work. We'll scrutinise EIPs and targets, publishing our findings every year. We will monitor and report on the implementation of environmental law. We'll advise government on proposed changes to the law and other matters related to the natural environment. And we will investigate suspected serious failures to comply with environmental law by public authorities. We will enforce compliance where we need to do so. Our toolkit empowers us to undertake a breadth of work, but these activities need to be targeted and coordinated if they are to drive genuinely positive change. Our proposed strategy outlines the approach that we think will work best. It fleshes out our ambition about how we can make a significant contribution. We set out clearly our core aim to focus specifically on those areas where our actions will have the greatest positive impact. We launched this strategy for consultation with more than half of our initial staff recruitment complete, and our transition to functional independence from DEFRA very nearly complete. We start as an organisation which will have 53 staff, in this, our initial phase. We must prioritise carefully as we identify the issues on which we will act, as well as the approaches we take, drawing on our toolkit. We will do that transparently, not least because in making these choices, there will be matters that we choose not to prioritise, and we know that these choices will not be easy ones. We set out in our strategy how we intend to make those choices and the factors that we will take into account so that our decisions can be well understood. Purposeful prioritisation will also ensure that we make effective use of public money. We look forward to a full review of our operations and resourcing later this year, when the evidence from our first months of operation can support a much better informed understanding of our resourcing needs for the future. The Environment Act requires us to report to Parliament on the sufficiency of our resources. We will be clear on the difference our resources allow us to make. Key to many of the approaches in our strategy are appropriate, productive relationships with other organisations, including those we oversee. We have already begun our work with a wide range of stakeholders. We are committed to being a learning and listening organisation, consciously working to bring diversity of perspective, thought and challenge to our work. We recognise the value to us of the technical expertise, insight and on-the-ground experience of others. We aim to earn our authority, so that our voice is one that is heard, respected, and can therefore influence better outcomes for the environment and people's health and well-being. We aim to be a trusted voice with a commitment to evidence and sound analysis. I'm so delighted with the support we've had from such a wide range of stakeholders. We've listened carefully to your advice, drawn on your insight, and I hope that many of you can see that reflected in our proposals today. I hope that you will read our consultation with interest and respond with your views. As I said at the start, we need to get this right and you can help us do that. Finally, I wanted to say that it has been a privilege to lead the OEP into its first operational year. As we have formed over the last few months, the calibre and expertise of our board members and both our interim and permanent staff has enabled us to move forward at considerable pace. I'll be handing over shortly to a number of our staff to talk you through the detail of our proposals. Every one of them has played a key part in getting us to this point, and each will play a key role in implementing our approach going forward. Together, we are committed to developing the OEP to be the best it can be. I look forward to working with them and with you to deliver this strategy for the lasting benefit of people and the environment. Thank you. I'll hand back to Mike now.
Thank you so much, Natalie and Dame Glenys, for setting the scene for us so well there. As Natalie mentioned there, what we'll be doing now is a couple of presentations just to talk you through some of the main themes and issues covered in the draft strategy. But before I hand over to our first speaker, I just wanted to say that you should be able to see Slido, an option to submit questions to us. And after the presentations, there will be an opportunity for us to put questions to a panel. So please do put your questions forward. Our first speaker is my colleague Andy Lester, who is Head of Business Strategy and Planning, and he will be talking to you about our draft strategic objectives and also a very important topic for us, which is prioritisation and how we will decide how best to use our time and resources. So I'll hand over to Andy now.
Thank you, Mike, and good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to introduce you to our strategic objectives and the approach we take to prioritisation. So firstly, our objectives. We have a principal objective in the Environment Act, and that is to contribute to environmental protection and improvement in the natural environment. Our 4 strategic objectives set out how we aim to achieve that and make our contribution. We set these 4 objectives out for consultation, as well as the approaches we describe for how we'll aim to achieve them. I'll introduce you to each of them now, before some of my colleagues go into the detail of how we propose to do our work. So as the OEP, we will strive for sustained environmental improvement. We know that government is uniquely placed to protect and improve the environment, not least because ambitious national plans, goals and targets are fundamental to environmental protection and improvement. Our aim is that government is held to account for delivery of those plans, goals and targets. We'll work towards that primarily through our scrutiny of the environmental improvement plans and the statutory targets that come with them. You'll hear more about how we'll do that later. we'll critically assess, report and advise on the development and delivery of these national measures, and in doing that hold government to account for their ambition, their progress and delivery. We'll also support this objective through our other work. For example, we'll make recommendations for how changes to the law or its implementation could help deliver government's plans, and by challenging failures to comply with the law that undermine environmental improvement. Secondly, we aim for better environmental law that is better implemented. Our aim is that the environment is protected and improved, and people are protected from the effects of human activity on the natural environment through better design and implementation of environmental law. We'll work towards this objective mainly through our work scrutinising environmental law and providing advice. Again, you'll hear more about the approach to that work in a minute. In pursuing this objective, we aim to improve the effectiveness of existing environmental law and support the good design and implementation of new ones. Our approach, or proposed approach, looks across all stages of the law, its design, and all relevant aspects of its implementation. Thirdly, our objective is improved compliance with environmental law. Here, our objective is that the environmental law can protect people and protect and improve the environment as was intended when the law was created. We expect government and public authorities to abide by the law so that this can happen. We'll work towards this objective by holding government and public authorities to account for compliance and challenging serious failure. You'll hear more about our approach to enforcement later. We'll work strategically, and we'll aim for all our work to achieve wider and sustained benefits. Our approach to scrutiny of the law and work to improve environmental law may also help identify and challenge systemic issues of non-compliance and their root causes, in turn leading to improved compliance overall. And fourthly, we aim for organisational excellence and influence. We believe the environment will be best served when we use our powers to their greatest effect, strategically, expertly and independently. Our objective is to be an organisation that does just that, to be effective and efficient, with the authority, relationships, expertise and voice to play our full part in national environmental governance. We set out some of the ways we're structured and some of the ways we'll work to make the most of our resources. We explain how we aim to develop and earn our authority and develop our voice, using them both with purpose and wisely, so that when we say what needs to be said, others listen. We also set out how we'll develop access to deep expertise and listen and engage with others. In our consultation, we seek views on these objectives and the approaches we set out to pursue them. We're really keen to hear what you have to say. We've spoken already today and you've heard about the importance of our approach to prioritisation, so I'm going to explain a bit about that approach now. We know that how we'll prioritise will be material to how much we achieve, and we're asking for your views on the approach we set out. We have a wide remit, and as Natalie has said, we start as an organisation that will have 53 staff. We'll not be able to do all that some people might wish of us, and nor can we tackle every problem. But where we choose to act, we'll act strategically, and we'll act with purpose, and we'll act to make a difference. We know it is really critical to choose well. We propose to make those choices in a structured way and to be transparent about how we prioritise, the things we prioritise and the things we don't. Our approach to make those choices is built on 4 principles. Firstly, we'll prioritise by outcome. We'll prioritise by what makes the most difference as a whole. One of the things this means is that the amount we do in each of our functions will differ over time. Sometimes we might have more enforcement casework. At other times, we might scrutinise more environmental law. It'll depend where we judge we can make the most difference. Our second principle is that we recognise that these choices are judgments. We'll use the evidence available to us at the time we decide to make them. And we'll do that by answering 4 questions. Firstly, how large an effect could our action have? How much difference can we make? And secondly, how likely is our ability to have that effect? We know that the environment is a complex system and the effect of our actions will not always be certain. So across all our work, we will aim to balance where we judge we might have greatest effects and where we judge we can be most confident of a positive impact, so that overall we make the most difference. Sometimes we know we'll be the only organisation able to act, and at other times we might judge others a better place to make a difference. We'll take account of these things in this third question of what is the strategic fit, alongside making judgments about the broad portfolio we spoke of and working to have balance across our work where we can and we should. And finally, we'll make judgments that we can do it, that we have access to the resources and expertise to make the difference we aim to. And the last principle here is that we'll be transparent about that, as I've set out before. We know prioritization is really important to our success, and that these principles and the approach we set out for consultation is the way we aim to do that. We ask for your views on this in the consultation, and I'll now pass back to Mike to introduce some of our next speakers who will go into some of the detail about the way we'll work.
Thank you very much, Andy. Very important topics there, but particularly that prioritisation piece, which I know is key for many people to understand. Our next speaker is my colleague Tim Graham, who is the OEP's Head of Natural Science and Analysis, and he will cover another really important topic for us, which is how we will set about to work with others, which the OEP obviously sees as absolutely key to us being effective and efficient in our work. So I'll hand over to Tim.
Thank you, Mike. As Mike's just mentioned, I'm going to briefly cover the ways of external working for the OEP, and that helps link back to what Natalie mentioned earlier on in terms of how we're forming productive relationships. Many of you in your organisations will already be a part of this important factor for the OEP. We don't exist in some sort of vacuum, so working with others is an important part of our success in the future. So external relationships will be founded on understanding, trust, and respect. These will be critical to the OEP's success, and hopefully you can all see how relevant that is. We will need to cooperate, communicate, and collaborate with a wide range of other public authorities and other organisations. And importantly, we will communicate openly where appropriate, and we will guard our independence of judgment and action where there are risks of conflict. And it's not just, I suppose, in some ways that the informal relationships, there's also formal elements to this. There's a need also just to highlight a relevant power within the Act as well. So we will draw on and respect the expertise of specialist bodies with whom our functions may overlap through written agreements such as memorandums of understanding. And obviously that's going to be important how we work with a number of bodies. But one of the important things to bring your attention to is the duty of cooperation. Public authorities must cooperate with us and provide us with assistance as we fulfill our role to protect and improve the environment. The key thing here is that the expectation is underpinned by law, and the Environment Act creates this duty on public authorities to cooperate with us and give us any reasonable assistance that we request. So there's an important, if short, area for you to actually give your feedback in the consultation on this. It's going to be an important foundation to our success in the future. So thank you. And back to you, Mike.
Thank you ever so much, Tim, for that. Before I hand on to the next speaker, just another plug for the Q&A. If you do want to send a question in, there's not much coming through at the moment, and we really are sort of committed to being open and honest and answering any questions you have. So please do put your questions forward. Our next speaker is my colleague Grant Daly, who is our Principal Complaints Manager. Complaints from everyone, including members of the public, is part of our enforcement powers. We'll talk a little bit more about enforcement later on, but Grant will talk you through our complaints policy and our approach to dealing with complaints. So handing over to Grant.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you all for attending. Good afternoon. My name is Grant Daly, and I'm the Principal Complaints Manager at the OEP. In this segment, I'll be explaining a bit more about the OEP complaint system. I'll be outlining the formalities behind submitting a complaint. I'll be explaining why complaints are important to the OEP and how the complaint system integrates into the OEP's wider functions. I'll also be talking about the complaints that we can consider, as well as the matters that the OEP is not able to assist with. In addition to this, I'll be touching on our commitments to those who submit a complaint to us. As I'm sure that many of you are aware, the OEP has a particular purpose, and our remit for considering complaints is outlined in specific detail within the Environment Act. In very specific terms, we are able to consider complaints providing they relate to an alleged failure to comply with environmental law, and that failure relates to England, a reserved matter, i.e. one that only the UK Parliament of Westminster can legislate for, or if our remit is subsequently confirmed, a matter relating to Northern Ireland. All complaints that are submitted to the OEP must relate to a public authority. And on the flip side of this, we are not able to consider complaints that have been submitted by themselves by a public authority. It is not the role of the OEP to mediate in disputes between public authorities. Furthermore, all complaints should have exhausted local resolution before the OEP is able to consider them further. By this, I mean that the relevant public authority should have had an opportunity to consider and respond to the matter before we can take it on board. In addition to this, there is an ordinary expectation outlined within the Act that complaints should be submitted within the specified time limit of either 1 year of the event taking place or 3 months after the end of local resolution, whichever is later. The OEP does have the discretion to waive the time limit, but can only do so in very exceptional circumstances. If a member of the public has concerns that meet the outline criteria, we'd invite them to consider the information on our website and submit a complaints form. On receipt of this form, we would consider the matter in more detail and would make a decision about how to proceed. So in discussing the OEP's complaint system, it is important to remember that the complaints process is one element of a much wider suite of functions that are designed to facilitate the OEP's objectives. In rationalizing the system, I often find it helpful to use the analogy of a mountain stream, with complaints information flowing downhill to the tributaries that are the OEP's functions and objectives. These tributaries themselves will in turn combine to create the river that is the OEP's principal objective of contributing to environmental protection and improving the natural environment. Given the OEP's objectives, the overriding aim of the complaints process is to provide a forum to enable members of the public to submit information to the OEP about alleged failures to comply with environmental law. As has been mentioned, the OEP is a small organisation with a large remit. And from a very pragmatic perspective, it simply would not be possible for all of us to be able to investigate every complaint that we receive. However, while investigations are an important component of the OEP's toolkit, they are not the only reason why complaints are important. Often overlooked is the value that individual complaints and the accumulation of individual complaints brings us in terms of broadening our intelligence whilst identifying key systemic and thematic issues. By integrating the complaints process into the wider functions and through, to use the analogy of the river, creating free-flowing information channels, we are in an opportune position to facilitate the OEP's ability to be able to see the big picture, thereby furthering the OEP's mission of protecting and improving the environment by holding public authorities to account. It is for this reason why I always emphasize the importance of complaints, even if it's not possible for us to take the matter to further investigation. As has been alluded to, the OEP has a very particular purpose, and our remit to consider complaints is outlined in specific detail within the Environment Act. In broad terms, we can consider matters related to a suspected failure to comply with environmental law, with the Environment Act defining environmental law as any legislative provision, other than the devolved provisions in Scotland or Wales, to the extent that it is mainly concerned with environmental protection. What might be less clear, and what I thought it might be helpful for me to clarify at this point, are the matters that we are unable to assist with. So the most obvious group of matters that we are unable to assist with are those that are described as being excluded matters within the Environment Act. This includes matters related to the armed forces and national security. It includes matters relating to taxation, spending, and the allocation of government resources. It also includes matters relating to the disclosure of or access to information. For various reasons, the legislation specifically prohibits us from considering these matters, and accordingly we are unable to take complaints of this nature further. Given the particular purpose of the OEP, it is essential for the organisation to have substantial expertise and a thorough understanding of environmental law, as well as government policy and ambition. It is also necessary for us to have developed knowledge as to the environmental matters that members of the public bring to our attention. However, whilst the OEP does have this expertise, we are unable to provide legal or other advice to individual complainants through the complaints process, or advocate on their behalf. The OEP's objectives are strategic and balanced, and as such it is essential for us to remain independent, impartial and objective at all times. If we were to provide legal advice or advocate on behalf of complainants, we'd risk the accusation of not being objective, and therefore the possible suggestion that we were not complying with our intended purpose. In a very similar vein, given the strategic aim of the OEP, we are unable to use the complaints process as a means of remedying personal injustice or providing individual redress. Whilst it may happen as we conduct our work, it is not the main aim of the process. I thought it might be helpful to end this segment by explaining a bit more about our commitments to those who submit complaints, as is outlined within our customer charter. While we won't be able to consider every complaint, it is our aim to make the complaints process as accessible and transparent as possible. In view of this, those that complain to us can expect to be treated with courtesy and respect. They can expect to receive transparent service with forthcoming explanation as to our processes and decisions. They can also expect to receive open and fair consideration, as well as to be kept updated on our progress with their complaints. In addition to this, they can expect our full commitment to deal with them impartially and without discrimination and prejudice. I hope this presentation has provided you with some further clarity as to our complaints process. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and I will now pass back to Mike.
Thank you so much, Grant, for that comprehensive view of our complaints handling and our approach to dealing with those complaints. Our next speaker is my colleague Emma Hawthorne, and I always trip over her title. It is Principal Monitoring Environmental Law and Advice Manager. She'll be covering a really, really important and quite chunky piece of work for the OEP, which is around our scrutiny of environmental law and scrutiny of targets and plans. So I'll hand over to Emma. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike, and hello, everybody. So as Natalie touched on, our functions, or our toolkit, if you like, are provided by the Environment Act, and these were commenced yesterday. So I'm going to talk about our scrutiny and advice functions and how they help us deliver our strategic objectives. So firstly, our statutory duty to monitor and report on government's progress with its environmental improvement plan. So in England, this is the 25-year environment plan, and in Northern Ireland, this could be the environment strategy, which some of you will be aware there was a recent public consultation which has just closed. So in England, government also has a duty to set legally binding targets by the end of October this year, and then we'll also monitor and report on government's progress with these. So our strategic objective is for sustained environmental improvement. And whilst other functions will contribute to this objective, we'll mainly achieve it through our work holding government to account on progress with the environmental improvement plans and targets. So how we propose to do this is through our independent analyses, which will critically assess and report on what is being achieved, and importantly, where there are issues that need addressing. Alongside comprehensive monitoring of progress across the areas covered by the environmental improvement plans, we'll also monitor selected areas of the environment in greater depth each year. We'll publish our findings for government, Parliament and others to see and act upon. So our first actions will be our first report on government's progress with its 25-year environment plan, which we'll publish early this year. And in it, we focus on the 6 building blocks that we believe are essential for a successful environmental improvement plan. Our intention is that our report informs the government's review of its 25-year environment plan, so that the revised plan is improved in terms of better governance and better monitoring, and this will improve the prospects of success. We'll also achieve this objective through our advice function, and we were pleased to be asked by DARA to provide advice on their environment strategy, and will do so should our remit in Northern Ireland be confirmed by the Northern Ireland Assembly and once our Northern Ireland functions are commenced. We'll also develop a research programme to identify critical gaps in evidence and understanding of the natural environment. And whilst we won't fill those gaps ourselves, we will undertake research to determine how they might be filled. We'll work with others to stimulate activity to fill these gaps by those best placed to do so. And we'll also develop expert and independent panels to support our work. So in this way, we aim for sustained improvement in the natural environment through government's delivery of its plans and goals and compliance with targets. So moving on to our statutory duty to scrutinise the implementation of environmental law, we can report on any matter concerned with the implementation of environmental law at any time, and we must publish our reports and arrange for them to be laid before Parliament or the Northern Ireland Assembly, and government must respond to our reports. Our strategic objective is for better environmental law better implemented. And whilst our other functions will also contribute to this objective, we'll mainly achieve it through our work scrutinising the implementation of environmental law. So moving on to how we will do that, the design and implementation of environmental law are matters for government and other public authorities. So our approach, therefore, will be built on engagement and influence and providing independent analysis, advice and recommendations to those who design and implement the law. So we believe the implementation of law goes beyond its introduction and compliance to the wider context and framework in which the law is applied in practice. Resourcing, other laws and incentives, and the choices made in administering and enforcing the law can all work against outcomes being delivered effectively. So through our stakeholder engagement and management of information, we'll maintain an overview of the implementation of environmental law. And this is the information that Grant referred to, where our broader oversight enables us to identify systemic or thematic issues. And each year we'll also target in-depth monitoring on a smaller number of environmental laws. And this will allow us to get to the root of how these laws are implemented, their effectiveness, and what improvements might be made. We'll produce authoritative reports and recommendations from our studies. And finally, our first actions will be commencing our monitoring work, and in selecting our first priority subjects for scrutiny, we'll consult with practitioners, public authorities and others who implement the law or are affected by it. We'll determine how to monitor and record relevant information, including establishing and maintaining an overview of upcoming reviews and changes to environmental law. And again, touching on our advice function, we'll give targeted advice to government. We believe it can make the most difference. Our objective is for environmental law and its implementation to be well designed and delivered so that positive outcomes for the environment and people's health and well-being are achieved. We aim to increase the effectiveness of existing environmental laws and support the good design and implementation of new ones. Our consultation document set out our proposed approach to our scrutiny and advice functions and asks for your views. And we look forward to hearing what you think. And I'll now hand back to Mike for the final presentation. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Emma. Covered a lot of territory there in a very few slides. So again, one of our messages to everyone sort of who's taken the time to be a part of this event is please do seek out the strategy document and read it in full, and please do take part in the consultation, as your expertise, your experience and your knowledge is so key to us sort of finalising our thinking and getting everything where it needs to be. Our final speaker for this afternoon's event is our principal lawyer, Hattie Owens. She'll be talking you through our approach to our enforcement powers. We've mentioned this briefly before. Obviously, you heard from Grant around our approach to the complaints part of our powers, and Hattie will now give you the overview of the other elements of that enforcement policy. So over to you, Hattie.
Thank you so much, Mike, and hello to everybody. It's very exciting to be here talking to you all today on this most momentous of days for the OEP. So as part of launching our draft strategy today, we're also launching our draft enforcement policy, which is contained within the strategy as an annex. And the enforcement policy is a really important piece of the OEP jigsaw. As we recognise in the draft policy, and as reflected by my colleagues from whom you've already heard, enforcement is just one of our functions. It's part of a wider toolkit, and we'll use it where it's the most appropriate tool for the job. With that in mind then, we can use our enforcement functions to hold government and other public authorities to account in relation to their compliance with environmental law. As noted on the slide, in this draft version of our policy, we have explained how we intend to do this, and we really look forward to your views on what we've set out. Now, as we've already heard, we've spoken to a number of people as we've been developing these proposals, and I want to take this opportunity to echo what my colleagues have already said, and just to say thank you so much to those of you who have enthusiastically engaged with us so far. These conversations have been really valuable as we've been finessing our thinking, and we're very much looking forward to further engagement with you throughout our consultation period. I'll now take you through some of the key aspects of the enforcement policy in its draft form. But note that this doesn't cover all of the policy's content, so I'd encourage you to have a good read through before responding. When you take a look, you'll see that we've set out our proposed approach to how we'll use the powers and duties that make up our enforcement functions in order to further our principal objective. We've set out 3 general principles which will underpin all of the enforcement work that we do. The first general principle is that public authorities must comply with the law. Whilst this might sound obvious, we think it's valuable to explicitly recognise this. This means that any failure to comply with environmental law by a public authority is potentially within the scope of our enforcement functions. Our second general principle is that enforcement activity should be targeted to where it's most needed. As Andy's already discussed more generally, we need to prioritise our work. This is also the case in the context of our enforcement functions. We won't be able to pursue every matter that we could potentially take on. As part of our prioritisation, we will consider where we could make the most difference, where we could have the greatest positive impact. This might include in relation to systemic issues or individual but related matters which, when taken together, could give rise to serious damage. Our third general principle is that our enforcement activity should take account of all of the relevant circumstances. Now, the relevant circumstances will vary from case to case, but we'll need to conduct our assessments on the evidence available to us at the time, and we'll need to exercise our professional and impartial judgment in considering that evidence. Moving on from the general principles then, more generally, our aim with our enforcement functions is to identify, address and importantly resolve issues of non-compliance with environmental law. We'll be proportionate in how we do this. For instance, we'll normally try to resolve matters through cooperation and dialogue with public authorities, but where we need to, we'll not be afraid to use our powers to take public authorities to court. Our enforcement policy also covers exactly what our enforcement powers are. We have a range of powers and duties that make up our enforcement functions. This includes a suite of new powers specific to us. As my colleague Grant has already discussed today, we can receive complaints from members of the public about potential failures to comply with environmental law. There's no charge to submit a complaint to us, and we accept complaints submitted in a variety of ways. We can also conduct investigations into potential failures. As part of this, we can request information from public authorities to help us get a comprehensive understanding of the issue. If we conclude an investigation and decide not to take any further steps, we will produce and usually publish an investigation report. This must include our conclusions following the investigation and, if we have them, any recommendations that we'd like to make. Where we're satisfied on the balance of probabilities that a public authority has failed to comply with environmental law, we can give them a decision notice. In this notice, we can set out the steps we think the authority ought to take in relation to the failure, for instance, to remedy the issue or prevent its recurrence. Public authorities are obliged to respond to this, explaining whether or not they will take the steps we've recommended, as well as any additional steps that they intend to take. And finally, where we need to, we can commence proceedings in the High Court through a bespoke new mechanism called environmental review. We can also take more conventional actions. We can launch judicial review proceedings in urgent cases, and we can apply to intervene in other parties' cases where we think that we can be of assistance to the court. Our enforcement policy also describes the decision-making framework that we intend to use to make sure that we're consistent in exercising our enforcement functions. In setting this out, we've explained how we intend to approach the assessment of seriousness. Now, as many of you will be familiar, seriousness is an important threshold for us in being able to take enforcement action. If we want to launch an investigation, if we want to request information from a public authority, if we want to take a public authority to court, we must consider that the potential failure to comply with environmental law is serious. Our proposal is that determination of seriousness will be rooted in a factor-based assessment. To this end, we've set out a number of factors that we think will be relevant in assessing whether or not a failure is serious. These factors include, for instance, whether the conduct raises any points of law of general public importance. Does it have wider implications? Would broader legal clarification be particularly helpful in this area? Also includes factors such as the frequency of the potential failure over time, including any cumulative impacts. And also the behaviour of the public authority in question. Have they acted deliberately, recklessly, or negligently? Have they ignored previous warnings or concerns raised about the issue? In addition, in cases that we think might need urgent action, we need to consider the likelihood that without an urgent judicial review, serious damage to the environment or to people's health would result. Again, we've set out examples of the kinds of factors that we think go to the seriousness of potential damage. These include, for instance, the nature of the harm, taking into account the particular characteristics of the people or the environmental features concerned, the degree of the harm, how severe is it, what's its extent, and wider issues such as any indication of a more widespread or systemic problem of which we should be aware. After considering the factors that are relevant, we'll make an overall appraisal of the seriousness based on our independent, objective and professional judgment. We would not normally expect to have to undertake technical assessments in order to reach this judgment. Of course, there will be circumstances in which we cannot be certain of all of the potential implications of a public authority's conduct. In such cases, we recognise the greater scope for adopting a proactive approach where the stakes are higher. Finally, our enforcement policy covers how we'll be objective and impartial, and how we'll have regard to the need to be transparent and proportionate through our enforcement actions. Please do take a good look through the policy. We're really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on and your responses to the proposals that we've set out. I'll now hand back to Mike.
Thank you ever so much, Hattie. That concludes the sort of presentations we've prepared for this event, and I'll now move us through into the Q&A panel, and we have started to get some questions in. So I'll move straight into those. So our first question is, how are you planning to promote to the public free? Sorry, I'll start again. How are you planning to promote the public free-to-use complaints facility more widely? And it talks that there's relatively low public awareness. And I think it's important to say that the OEP will have its own independent press and communications team, and that will be ramping up as we sort of become more mature and become sort of further along our journey into being sort of fully operational. And there's been a lot of work done around making sure that we're explaining that complaints process and the complaints policy is easy to find on the website and easy to follow with clear guidance. I think we would also very much be looking to our stakeholders to help us share some of that messaging around that complaints policy and sort of use their networks to get those messages out as well. But I think there are probably some more immediate priorities for us in terms of the strategy and getting some of the thinking and processes in place that will help us make best use of our complaints policy and process. And the eagle-eyed amongst you will probably spot we have a new panel member who hasn't been part of the presentations, and that's our General Counsel, Peter Ashford. And I'll probably just hand over to you, Peter, to see if there's anything you want to add about those, the bits of the strategy and those legal tests that we need to have in place before we can really get best use of the complaints process.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Ruth, for the question. I think we definitely want to be an open, accessible and known to the public as an organisation. And so we will in due course be using tools like our website and social media to promote ourselves and the fact that we exist and have a job to do that provides that service. But as Mike says, I think it's important that we recognise we need to get the right policies and procedures in place through the strategy and enforcement policy before we really move on to the next stage in our journey and development. And that's what we're here seeking to do.
Thank you, Peter. Okie doke. I'll move on to the next question, which is that prioritising the OEP's work in part by how large an effect it will have, makes sense, but it will be tricky. So how will the scale of effect impact be assessed? And Natalie, can I direct that one to you, please?
Of course you can, Mike, and thank you for a very insightful question there, Chris. And you're quite right, it will be tricky, and in some respects, being an issue-based and adopting an issue-based strategy is the harder path. We know that information and evidence in relation to any of the issues that we are assessing will inevitably be imperfect, and we know that we will have to exercise judgment in relation to that information if we are not to suffer from undue delay. So we will do the best we can with the information that we have available to us. We will make some limited extra inquiries if we need to, and we're making those assessments. And we will develop and evolve our bank of understanding and knowledge as we progress as an organisation. But you'll see set out in our strategy an acknowledgement of the fact that often we will be making judgments on the basis of imperfect information. But nonetheless, we think it is really important before we embark on a particular area of prioritisation to really assess the impact that we think we can have.
Thank you, Natalie. Okie doke. Next question. The strategy and enforcement policy are both very helpful, but they are technical, detailed documents. How is the OEP ensuring wider public feedback and that accessibility or transparency of process are fully considered in the consultation? So I'll have the first stab at that one in my sort of role as head of comms. One of the things we are looking into is whether or not we can do some targeted public engagement forum type events to broaden that reach. But I think it is fair to say that the nature of our work means we really do need to hear from that informed, experienced, knowledgeable sector in a sort of first priority. And then, as Peter has sort of alluded to in a previous answer, wider promotion from there, through social media, through the comms planning, the comms team. But as I've said, also, we'll be looking to do some targeted work with the public. It is a challenge, I think, getting that kind of technical and detailed and very specialised sort of area of work out into that general public. But it is something that has been identified as a priority for us and as something that certainly the board want us to take forward. Natalie, can I just go to you and see if there's anything you want to add on that question, please?
Thank you, Mike. Firstly, I would say that enforcement policies are inevitably technical documents, and ours is no different. And that's because enforcement is a legalistic and complex business. And we don't make any apologies for that. And what we are focusing on is our publicly accessible pages. We're investing time in our website, in accessibility testing of the parts of our website deliberately targeted at members of the public. And as we progress from our strategy, which very much is describing how we'll undertake our work, as we move into our corporate plan, which will set out the focuses, the what we are going to do with our strategic approach, we will work extremely hard to ensure that we are accessing all of the perspectives that we need to do our job. And that's particularly relevant when we look at the particular adverse environmental impacts on people's health and people's well-being. So we are on something of a journey, and this is the first step. And as we progress, as Mike says, we'll be looking to engage increasingly widely to help us make the choices that we need to do, and to make, in particular, our complaints portal fully accessible.
Thank you, Natalie. Next question I'll go to. Will the OEP be able to provide assistance to members of the public to understand and navigate the large body of environmental law that public authorities must comply with? And I think talking around the large body of environmental law, I was going to direct that question to our General Counsel, Peter. If you would like to attempt that one. Yep.
Thank you, Mike. And again, thank you, Lucy, for the question. I think the short answer here is we will play our part. The slightly longer answer, perhaps, is that as an organisation with the resources we have and the remit we have, of course, we have an element of what we can do in terms of providing assistance for members of the public, particularly members of the public who access our complaint service. But it can only ever be one element of understanding that large and complex body of environmental law. So we will, and in fact we already do, signpost complainants who come to us, not quite understanding what public authorities are responsible for what. So we will signpost to the correct public authorities to take their complaints to in the first instance. And in due course, we're developing our website, and we hope to include on the website useful information at a reasonably high level, admittedly, as to which public authorities are responsible for broadly which areas of environmental law. So we do want to play our part, and we do want to make best use of the tools we have available to communicate with the public and provide information to the public that supports us in our role.
Thank you, Peter. I'll keep going with the questions. There's one which I think I've missed out, so I'll go back to. As you state that your office will advise government, councils, etc. on environmental law and policy, should you offer your help to Stormont and Northern Ireland Government on their strategy and proposed environment bill? Now, I think Emma may well have covered some of that, all that to a certain extent in her piece. But Natalie, is there anything you just want to add to that one before we move on?
Thank you, Mike. So many of you will be aware that we are waiting final confirmation of our Northern Ireland remit from the Northern Ireland Assembly, and we anticipate having that next month. But until that is finalised, we can't preempt that decision. But specifically, turning to the Northern Ireland Environment Strategy, it would fall within our statutory remit to monitor against that strategy, and we have been asked to provide advice to Stormont. We are considering what that advice should be at the moment. And so I suppose that the answer to the question is that we will offer our help, indeed have been asked for our help. And once our Northern Ireland remit is absolutely confirmed, we will get on with doing exactly that.
Thank you, Natalie. And I've just spotted there's a sort of related question that I can come straight back to you again with, which is, will there be specific OEP staff dedicated to Northern Ireland matters once Assembly has approved? Obviously, we can't preempt that. And are there plans for North-South cooperation on matters including transboundary effects? Can I put that to you, Natalie, please?
Yes, you can. So we are working with our colleagues in Northern Ireland at the moment in parallel with the decision-making about the OEP's remit for Northern Ireland. Our current intent is to integrate our Northern Ireland work into the main body of the OEP. So we don't have an England team and a Northern Ireland team. We have a single OEP with remit over the two jurisdictions. And that's because in large part our role in Northern Ireland under the Environment Act is broadly the same as our role in England. And we will need to draw on the same breadth of capabilities across the OEP for Northern Ireland as we would for England. So we wouldn't look to replicate a team. We would want to be able to draw on the full capacity of the OEP to focus on Northern Ireland matters in the same way that they would in England. In relation to the transboundary question, there is no short answer to that. Issues of devolved environmental law and the transboundary issues apply in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and within Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. There are even further complications around consistency of law there. It is a matter that we will need to take into account on a case-by-case basis. It isn't straightforward, and it is now impossible to extract general principles. What we will need to do in relation to specific Northern Ireland matters, and indeed sometimes in England as well, where there are transboundary issues within the United Kingdom, is consider those on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you, Natalie. There's one question which is around whether or not people will be able to access the slides after this presentation. What I would say is that this is being recorded and will be available to view after the event, and we'll make sure that link is readily available on the website for people. But if anyone does want the slides, I can take an undertaking to make sure that happens. So I'll take that one on. Next sort of substantial question, how is the OEP going to address EDI as part of its strategy, and what role do you see yourselves playing in providing sector leadership on this important issue? And I think, Natalie, I'll have to put you back on the spot for that one, please.
That's quite all right, Mike. I had to invite some of my fellow panel members. So we have taken equality, diversity and inclusion extremely seriously as we have grown the organisation. In the first part, we wanted to recruit a staff that brought real diversity of perspective and experience into the OEP. And we have done that cognizant that the environmental sector is a sector that really does struggle with diversity across a number of different areas, and we have certainly experienced that. We have done the best we can in terms of making the OEP an inclusive and representative organisation. There is more to do, however, and at the moment, as we move to full functional independence, we have commissioned internal work within the OEP to really focus on how we can make the OEP a genuinely inclusive organisation in how we work and how we work with each other. And more broadly, and I think a number of you have raised questions about how the general public can engage with the OEP. More broadly, we are mindful of the particular disproportionate impacts that there can be on certain groups with sharing particular protected characteristics arising from environmental harm. And this is something that will be a relevant factor in relation to how we assess seriousness, particularly through the lens of threats to people's health and well-being. So it is a challenge. It is going to remain a challenge as it is for so many of us in this particular sector. I think we have made good steps in the right direction, but undoubtedly there is more to do, and there will continue to be more to do on an ongoing basis. We are always open to hearing from you, from our stakeholders. We are always open to hearing new ideas and suggestions. So please do. I know many of you do when you engage with us directly, and we will continue to be interested in hearing from you.
Thank you, Natalie. Let me have a look what we've got. Thank you for this event. The consultations the OEP has already taken part in. It's very welcomed, especially the publicising of our responses. Keen to hear more about consultations that OEP can and will take part in, appreciating prioritisation. So I think I have to go to you again, Natalie, in terms of obviously prioritisation is a key part of the strategy that we're now consulting on. Are there any sort of other plans to do any more work around that, or will this be the sort of fundamental piece of work to set our approach on prioritisation? And feel free to bring in any of your colleagues if you wish.
Thank you, Mike. So I'll start, but I'll invite my colleague Emma Hawthorne, who leads on this area of work for us a lot of the time. So the OEP until very recently was in interim form. Our full powers only came into force yesterday, and that includes our ability to provide formal advice to government. It is our intent to use our voice wisely and to invest in making sure that when we do provide advice, it is sound, well analysed, well supported by evidence, advice given at the right time to be influential. What that means for us is an active programme of forward planning and prioritisation around the principles that we've set out in our consultation. So those things that we can make the most difference. And yes, we may well respond to public consultations, but I think most of the time our preference will be to use our statutory advice function where that is appropriate and timely. But Emma is our expert here on the panel today, so I will invite Emma to pick that up and add her very expert view.
Thank you, Natalie. So yes, my team is responsible for this work area, and we do screen consultations every week. So we're aware of what consultations are coming out, and we're aware it's an extremely busy time at the moment with a lot of things coming out of the Environment Act. So as Natalie said, prioritisation will be key. How we continue to screen those consultations going forward will be informed by our strategy. So please give us your views on our prioritisation approach. But just to say, the consultations that we don't respond to, we're considering how we might track those, because it will be important for us to know what happened after those consultations occurred and what government did next, what the next steps were. So it's all work currently in train. So yes, interested in people's view on our prioritisation approach. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. And I think we're got one more question to cover, and it is one which I know has sort of been one subject to a lot of internal discussion within the OEP, which is how do we consider broader aspects such as socio-economic factors alongside our environmental objectives? Again, I think I'll probably start with you, Natalie, on that one, and see where you want to go from there.
Thank you, Mike. And inevitably, that's a challenging question to provide a general answer to. In relation to the work that we do, so often in making an assessment, the factors that we have to balance will be very context specific. And that means that in certain circumstances, socioeconomic factors might be relevant, and others maybe less so. It's also will depend as well in relation to the functions that we are exercising. So I might invite our General Counsel, Peter Ashford, to flesh out a little bit, in particular when we're making enforcement decisions, which are decisions that can often be that much more carefully balanced in terms of how we choose to take forward actions.
Yes, thank you, Natalie. And as Natalie says, this has been an area we've been considering alongside the development of the enforcement policy and the strategy, and to what extent the factors that we've set out in the documents for consultation encompass the broadest possible range of factors that could be relevant to our decision making. So, of course, we start from the fact that our principal objective and our mission is around protecting the environment, holding government and other public authorities to account against their environmental commitments. But in seeking to make judgments on that and prioritise and approach some of the legal tests that we need to approach, it will be very case specific, but there will be cases where, taking account of all the relevant factors, we need to take into account the social, the economic and the environmental implications of the behaviour we're observing or the actions we may or may not take. And we have to do that in a proportionate and rounded way. That's hopefully what we've set out in our strategy and enforcement policy, but as others have said, we're very keen to hear what stakeholders think about that and where they think we could improve.
Thank you, Peter. David has just snuck a question in just as I was about to wrap up the questions, and I think another one has just landed as well. So regarding the tricky issue of predicting impact when deciding priorities, is this in part a question of identifying critical issues where progress is most likely to be attained by exercising the OEP's powers and strategic functions? Andy is nodding. But I'll start with Natalie, and then you may wish to bring Andy in. But I think that is quite comprehensively set out in the draft strategy. So anything to add to that, Natalie, starting with you?
Thanks, Mike. And David, I think you have hit the nail exactly on the head. That is exactly the intent of our strategy. The OEP has the ability to undertake certain activities. We have the powers that we have. Sometimes those activities will be ideally placed to drive meaningful change. And in other circumstances, our activities would not have that effect. And in our strategy, what we are trying to set out is a methodology for us to find those issues where the OEP can make the biggest difference through our activity. And so it's a little bit to add to what you've said, because I think you've absolutely nailed what we are trying to achieve. But I'll ask Andy to flesh that out a little bit if he's got anything he wants to add.
All I was going to say was yes. I think that in answer to that question, it's simple. Yes, I think the answer is you've said it's a succinct description of what indeed we're trying to achieve. So nothing beyond that.
Thanks, Andy. Okie doke. There is one question left, and actually it gives Natalie a break. This one is for Dame Glenys, again from Ruth. So I wonder if Dame Glenys might say a few words on the strategic importance of transparency in maintaining credibility and forming organisational culture.
Yes, I'm very happy indeed to do that. Thank you, Ruth, and good afternoon to you. And thank you, everyone who's asked such interesting questions. So I think it's plain when you read our strategy that what we are seeking to be is a credible organisation and to do the best that we can for the environment with the skills, the capability and capacity that we have. And there are some important attributes that we need to possess and develop in order to be credible. And a lot of those are actually related to the culture of our organisation. Yes, how we treat each other, how we treat others, how we work, how responsive we are, those sort of attributes that we want to see develop and grow. For me, it's really important as an organisation we do what I call active listeners. That isn't just listening for the sake of it, it's actually hearing it and exploring with people what they are saying to us and what they're telling us. And active listening is so important. We've started off, I think, and on a good footing, and I think you've recognised that, Ruth. Thank you very much. And we will always try and actively listen. That's the first thing. Secondly, we do need to engage with as many groups and individuals as possible. We're beginning to do that, but there is so much more that we can do. And now that Mike Fox is with us and we're getting a bit of extra resource, we hope to do yet more there. So engagement is so right. We know that to be credible, we've got to make the best possible decisions. And this consultation and our strategy is all about that, really, about how we will prioritise, how we'll know what's serious, how we'll use the powers that we have to best effect to make the best possible difference, yes, David, that we, the OEP, can make to the environment. So making good decisions is really important. Using our powers astutely, not always thinking the answer is enforcement, and it may be that sometimes we have to use a number of our powers at any one time, or sometimes just influence will do. So being astute about how we work, which powers we use once we get to the point where we prioritise an issue, that will be so critical to our success, I think. But yes, you're absolutely right. Being a transparent organisation will be critically important. Now, not sure Natalie and I think there's any other way to be in the modern day in the public sector. I suspect our General Counsel Peter will give us wise advice when we do need to be a little bit careful so as not to scupper an enforcement matter, for example. And I think our enforcement policy is quite clear in our commitment to transparency, but not at a cost to successful enforcement. But otherwise, of course, we will wish to be as transparent as we possibly can. If we're not, we're only going to brew suspicion, aren't we, about what we're up to. So yes, transparency will be critical for us, and hopefully we've started as we need to go on in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Dame Glenys, and thank you to all my colleagues on the panel for their answers to these questions. That pretty much brings us to the end of the questions, I think. I know we're running a little bit ahead of time. I think we all got a bit of red light fever and maybe spoke more quickly than we did in rehearsals, but that's no bad thing. I know time is precious, and we're very grateful for all of those who've joined us for this event this afternoon. Before I sort of hand over to Natalie just for some concluding remarks and to bring the afternoon to a close, I guess it's just important to make sure that you all know how to access the consultation. So it is live on the OEP website, which is www.theoep.org.uk. There's also a link to it from the sort of landing page or the homepage of this event. And you can respond to the consultation online, and there's also an email address and a document you can do sort of not through the portal, but just email as your response. And the email address for our consultations is consultations@theoep.org.uk. And just a little thing, but you might notice that that's an OEP email address as we're now moving into our own IT and OEP emails. It's the little things, but they aren't. I will now hand over to Natalie just to bring the event to a close for us.
Thank you very much, Mike. And I said it right at the start, and I'll say it again now. We wouldn't be here today putting forward a strategy which we hope has been well thought through, well tested, if it wasn't for the consistent support, engagement, expertise and insight of so many of our stakeholders. So I'd like to reiterate my huge thanks to everyone who has helped us on this journey. So just to wrap up, we set out on the slide here some key points. This strategy is intended to cover the very first stages of the OEP operation, We expect to review it in about 18 months' time so that we can evolve and grow it from the experience of the organisation being fully operational. And that means if some of the areas of our strategy don't work as we intended, we will rapidly review it and grow it. We will continue to engage widely with those that inform and are affected by our work. And we have already engaged extensively in the development of our thinking. And even if you have been part of that journey, please do respond to this consultation. We want to hear from you genuinely, and it will help us get this right if you can respond fulsomely. In due course, as you will expect, we will be establishing a performance framework, and that is so that we can measure the success of what we are trying to achieve. And again, it is critically important for us to be able to do that well. So when we get things right, we can demonstrate the benefit of the OEP. And of course, we will regularly report transparently on our framework in our corporate plan and in our annual reports. Our consultation is open now. It's going to run for another 8 weeks from today. You can submit through our online survey or via email, as Mike has set out. And we will listen to what you have to say before we make our final decisions on our strategy and enforcement policy. And some elements may well change. If you think that we've got something wrong, if you think that we have missed something, please do tell us. It is critically important to us at the OEP that we get off to the strongest possible start that we can, and your insight and perspective really does help us do that. So please do engage with that and get back to us as part of the formal consultation. So thank you very much. I'd like to say thank you to all of our staff here who have taken you through the strategy today, and thank you as well to our board who have supported, challenged and brought their own expertise to this strategy today. And again, I'll say it again, thank you to all of you. And we look forward to hearing from you in response to our consultation. Thank you.